Okay. So that's an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so it has, for example, the ID. We have to identify an ID for each participant. Okay, so the ID will take us back to the participant. Okay, for example, this is a survey or a questionnaire or a scale or a data collection tool. We printed out that data collection tool and we did an interview with the patients and we gathered those information: gender, age, hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, asthma, obesity, CKD, and so on. So we have to give it an ID number so we can go back to it later on. So this is an ID, I mean the first patient, and this is the second, for example, patient, and so on. Then gender, 1 represent male, 2 represent female. So we enter only codes here, only numbers. Age, we enter the age. Then hypertension, 1 represents yes and 0 represents no hypertension. The same with the diabetes, the same with the dyslipidemia, the same with asthma, and the same with the obesity, and the same with the CKD, and the same with the metformin medication, whether this patient has taken a metformin or not. And then the lymphocytes count, for example. I'm giving an example over here of the lab results. So we give the count if it is a numerical. If it is not a numerical, then we give it a code. So here, this is only one, the column represents one variable only. Age, for example, is a variable. Gender is a variable. So the column should represent only one variable. And the row should represent only one participants or individual. And the cell over here, the cell represents one response only. Represents one response only. So it's very, very important. We cannot mix, we cannot put more than one response in one cell. Okay, we cannot put more than one individual in one row. And we cannot put more than one variable in one column. This is very important in data entry. This is an Excel spreadsheet, and this is the SPSS data view over here. So one column represents one variable, one row represents one individual or participants, and the cell represents only one response. That's it, only one response, no more. Now, after we coded the data, we have coded the data, then we did the data entry. Now, first step is to do data cleaning, what we call it data cleaning. You know, we are human being. We may miss some data. We may collect or we may enter inaccurate data, okay, or wrong data. So we have to identify the missing data. We have to test the accuracy of the data entered. We have to identify what we call the outliers. And this is done through the data cleaning. How we do data cleaning? First of all, we visually compare the data file with the original. First of all, we visually compare them. And then we may perform some descriptive statistics. Okay, so frequency count should be checked for all categorical variables. We check all the categorical variables and we check or we do a frequency counts to all of the categorical variables. And then we perform a descriptive statistics. For example, minimum, the maximum, the mean, We may do cross tabs, we may do figures in order to identify the frequency and percentage, in order to identify the outliers or the inaccurate entered data or the wrong entered data. Wa'ad remembers that we had a study, we conducted a study together. First of all, they did the data coding, and then they did the data entry. They gave it to me. The first of all, what I did, I was, doing the data cleaning. I conducted a descriptive statistics. I checked the minimum and the maximum of the, for example, age. The minimum age was 0. Okay, when I checked it. And I went back to Wad and I told her that there is a mistake. How come there is a 0 age? Okay, so when we checked the data again, we realized that the data was entered by mistake, that the age was 7 months, and instead of 7 months, it was entered 0. So we corrected that data. So it's a very important step to do what we call descriptive statistics in order to see the overall picture of the data and to check the outliers, the accuracy of the data, and any missing data. And this come through, this is called a data cleaning, and it's done through the descriptive statistics. Now this takes us to a different issue, or a statistics analysis. I've just mentioned what we call it a descriptive statistics. Statistics, what does a statistics mean? Statistics is the process of organizing, collecting, managing, and analyzing data. That's called the statistics. Organizing, managing, collecting, and analyzing data. So statistics does not mean only analysis of the data. That's why it's very, very important when you plan your study and when you plan your data collection method, you have to consult it with a biostatistician or a statistician in order to check the different variables and the possible relationship before you go and you collect your data. So it's a very important. And statistics, there are two different types of statistics. We have what we call it the descriptive statistics, إحصاء وصفي. It used to describe and synthesize the data. It gives a whole picture of the statistics, like for example, the numerical techniques, mean, standard deviation, median, IQR, mode, frequency and percentage. This is all called descriptive statistics. Graphs, figures, also cross tabs. This is all called descriptive statistics. So we have, for example, 50% of the data were, 50% of the participants were female, 50% of them were male, and so on. So this is called the descriptive statistics. And we have what we call it inferential statistics. It's used to make inferences or conclusion about the population or the possible relationship between, the statistically possible relationship between the sample. Okay, that's the different types of statistics: descriptive and inferential statistics. Descriptive, الإحصاء الوصفي والإحصاء الاستدلالي. Now, descriptive statistics like frequency and percentage. When you report the frequency, you have to report the percentage. So you can't report percentage without the frequency. It's very important. When you report mean, you have to report the standard deviation. When you report median, you have to report the IQR. Range, the minimum and the maximum. and the cross tabulation. This is called a descriptive statistics. And then we have inferential statistics data, to check this possible relationship between the variables, the statistically significant relationship or differences between two or more groups or two or more samples. So in inferential data analysis, there are several statistical tests that can be used to examine the relationship between two or more variables or between two or more groups. That's why we have to know the type of the data in order to apply the right statistical test. Okay, in order to, so in particular, these statistic tests for statistical significance offers a statistically significant relationship between variables or statistically significant relationship between two or more groups. And statistical softwares. There are different types of statistical softwares. There is SPSS, Statistical Package for Social Sciences. There is R program, and there is Stata, and SAS. These are all statistical package. Anyone can use them. Anyone can learn how to use them. However, what's more importantly is to know to have an idea or a good background in statistics. So what test should you apply? What is applicable here and what is not applicable here, okay? For example, if you would like to study the relationship between two numerical data, what test should you apply? If you would like to study the relationship between one categorical, one numerical data, what test should you apply? If it is two groups, what test should you apply? If it is more than two groups, what test should you apply? If it is, for example, a prediction, you would like to study the predictors. The aim of the study was to identify the predictors of something, all right? So what test should you apply, and so on. So if you have a good background in statistics, you can determine the type of the test to be applied, and then everything would be easy. As a statistical package is only tool to be used, and whatever data you enter, whatever test you do or you apply, can be applied and gives you a result. However, the statistical application was not, was not the right one. For example, you did a t-test instead of a man with new test, for example, and you did not, because the data was not normally distributed data. So you went and did a t-test instead of man with new test. This is a wrong test to be applied over here, though it will give you a result. So factors influencing selection of statistical methods. First of all, you have to have aim and objective of the study. You have to know it. Type and distribution of the data used, whether it's normally distributed data or not normally distributed data. For example, in normally distributed data, you apply what we call the parametric methods. Okay, parametric methods including t-test and ANOVA, t-test between two groups, ANOVA more than two groups. And non-parametric methods, if you would like to apply, for example, a man with new test and a cross-Coriolis test, and also nature of observation, whether it's paired or unpaired. Okay, for example, you may use, if it's normal distributed data, use what we call it a t-test, paired t-test, paired t-test, if it is normally distributed data, and if it is unpaired, if it is non-normally distributed data, then we use what we call it a man with new test. So how to select a test? To choose the particular significant test, the researcher should consider at least the 3 questions. First of all, do we have 1 sample, 2 samples, or more than 2 samples? Okay, it's very important. If it is 1 sample, okay, or if it is 2 samples or 2 groups or more than 2 groups. Now we have to consider this first of all. Secondly, if more than 1 sample are involved, are individuals dependent or related? What do I mean? For example, I would like to study the relationship between gender and systolic blood pressure. So I have a sample of 1,000 male and female, and I took their systolic blood pressure, and I would like to study the relationship between the 2 genders. So 2 independent samples over here we have. So they are not related, okay? 2 independent samples. Or I have 1,000 sample, okay? And I would like to check their systolic blood pressure before smoking and after smoking. So it's the same sample, though, and I'm going to collect data in 2 different occasions, and I would like to study the relationship between the 2 intervals or the 2 occasions from the same sample. So the sample is related over here. So we do what we call it, if it's normally distributed data, we do what we call it a paired t-test. Now, is the measurement scale nominal, ordinal, internal, or ratio? It's very important as well. Now, in terms of, for example, correlation. Correlation is done for 2 numerical data. I'll give an example. 2 numerical data. Age is a numerical continuous data. And pulse is a numerical data. So if I would like to study the relationship between age and age and pulse, we do what we call it a correlation coefficient. Okay, in correlation, we study different parameters, the p-value, whether there is a relationship between the variables or not, how strong is the relationship, and the direction of the relationship, whether it's upward or downward, positive or negative. It's very important. Now, if we have, for example, 2 categorical data, I have gender and I have a, let's say, smoking status. Gender, male, female, that's a categorical data. And smoking status, do you smoke or you don't smoke? Yes, no, another categorical data. If we'd like to study the relationship, we do what we call it a crosstabs or a chi-square, okay? And so on. So in order, you have to have a good a background in statistics in order to apply the right statistic test. Now, these are the different types of parametric and non-parametric. For example, first is the descriptive statistics. For parametric, we report the mean and the standard deviation for parametric methods. And now for non-parametric, we report the median and IQR. So for parametric methods, I always say this, and I always recommend this, for always do not go less than 30 samples. Many ask me, for example, what is the right sample size? I always say, I mean, there is no single method of calculating the sample size. Different parameters will determine the sample size, which is alpha level, p-value, and the effect size. Though we can play around with them and increase or decrease the sample size. But most of the references, they say do not go to less than 30 samples. So if it is more than 30, you apply parametric. If it is less than 30, you do a non-parametric methods. Now, if it is two unpaired groups, independent t-test. If it is non-normally distributed data, we go to a man-Whitney test. Now, if it is more than two groups, ANOVA for parametric and Cross-Corvallis for non-parametric. If it is three or more paired groups, repeated measures ANOVA or a Friedman for non-parametric methods. Linear regression or linear relationship, between two numerical data, we do what we call it correlation. A Pearson correlation coefficient or a Spearman rank correlation coefficient for non-parametric methods. Now, linear regression predict one outcome variable by at least one independent variable, which is a linear regression model for parametric, and non-parametric, non-linear regression model for or log normal data for non-parametric. Okay. Now, statistical methods to compare the proportions, test of association between two categorical data. We do what we call it chi-square, like the example I've just mentioned, gender and smoking status. And also to test change in the proportion between two third groups, paired groups, comparison between proportion. We do what we call it a z-test. There are another, what we call them a semi-parametric and non-parametric methods. Semi, not the parametric, like the regression, the binary logistic regression, a multi-nominal logistic regression, and we have also a survival analysis and so on in order to detect the relationship between the outcomes and the observations. This is a workout review of SPSS. Here, for example, you go analyze descriptive statistics, and then it shows frequencies. If you would like to study to identify the frequency and the percentage, and then descriptive if it's mean. If you would like to detect the descriptive, like for example, mean and standard deviation and the minimum and the maximum. Explore if you would like to detect the mean and the standard deviation and median and IQR and mode. And crosstabs if you would like to study the categorical relationship, the association, between two categorical variables. From analyze also, if you would like to compare the mean, we have one sample t-test, or we may have independent sample t-test, or paired sample t-test, or one way ANOVA. That's for the parametric methods, the normally distributed data, where the data is normally distributed. And then we do have, for example, the non-parametric methods, or the non-parametric tests. We have one sample, independent sample, or related sample, or legacy dialogue. Here you go. See, for example, and then also we have the scale. If would like to study the Cronbach alpha or the reliability test of the scale, That's the reliability analysis, which it gives you the scale. I mean, it gives you the Cronbach alpha results. And also, if you would like to study the correlation between two numerical variables, then this is analyze, correlate, and then bivariate, and you identify your data and your variables, and you should be able to get the results. What time is it? Okay. So first of all, it's very important that the researcher knows the basic concepts of statistical methods to conduct the study. I mean, the research study that produce a valid and reliable results. We have to take into consideration when deciding, I mean, the assumption or the normative distribution to determine or to decide on the most appropriate test. And wrong or inappropriate use of statistical methods may lead to defective conclusions and harm the evidence-based practice. And since the planning of the study to data collection, analysis, and review process should ensure the correct and appropriate use of the biostatistical methods in the research. So the statistical analysis to be conducted have to be planned at the time of proposal, at the time of planning the study. You know, what variables will be tested together, what data to be collected, and what test will be conducted for the study. And I liked بصراحة the part of the questions. So I'll open, I don't want to talk a lot. So if you have questions, we can answer them one by one. We'll spend the next 30 minutes questions and answers. Waad, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we'll spend the next 30 minutes answer the questions and having a discussion.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Abrar. You can talk.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Regarding the inferential descriptive, I think.
Statistics. Yes, inferential statistics.
Sorry. Yes. Is ANOVA one of the example of the inferential statistics?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
because,
yeah.
And also I have another question. So now I'm doing my master's degree at New York Medical College, and I'm at the part of like analyzing or maybe conducting an existing data of gestational diabetes. So I have a data set, and I did like an analyzing test to see the missing data, and I have like more than 10% of missing data. Do you think this data set is acceptable or not?
What was the data collection method you used?
The data collection, I took the data set from one of the health organizations in the United States. And I performed the analyzing test via SAS.
Okay.
So I did proc freq, which is the frequency that you talked about and you mentioned. And I found that there is more than 10% missing data. So do you think it's acceptable to like work with this data set or not?
Well, why do you have a justification for the missing of the data? Why did you have this missing?
Actually, no, because I took this data from a health organization, so I didn't like obtain these data.
All right, I got it. Now, well, the data out or it's very anticipated or expected that we may have missing data, especially in self-reports. Okay, for example, you may ask a simple question, age, and they leave it blank, they don't answer it. Do you have, for example, diabetes? They may find it, for example, sensitive, and they don't answer it, while they answer the other questions. So we consider this a missing data. 10% is acceptable because you will analyze them, I mean, you will give an overall analysis of the data. Okay?
So it's more
You will
than
not analyze
10%.
them individually. So at least, I mean, as long as you have a justification for the missing data, that's okay. If you justify why did you have this missing data, I mean, you have to justify it to the examiners or to the reviewers who will review your study. Why did you have this missing data? If you have an, I mean, explanation and a good justification and interpretation of that missing data, then it should be fine.
So what do you think the acceptable percent of missing data?
There is no percentage.
No percentage.
There is no percentage that we can accept it.
Because if you have like many missing data, you could not use this.
Yeah, you may delete, for example, the individual, for example. I mean, trim it. Okay, so we have two. I mean, dealing with the missing data. We deal with it in a different ways. We may trim the missing data first of all, or we may analyze the data. I mean, we give an overall analysis of the data. And as long as you have a justification for the missing data, it should be okay. I mean, because missing data is an issue and it's expected and we can't overcome it. We can minimize it, but I don't think we can overcome it.
Yeah. Dr. Abbas?
In terms of ANOVA is analysis of variances.
Yes.
And it's a parametric method. It studies the relationship between more than three groups. And we have to have one numerical and one categorical data. Got me? So one numerical, I'll give an example. For example, we have nurses, we have physicians, and we have pharmacists. So three groups. And we calculated their systolic blood pressure. So the systolic blood pressure is a numerical data. And the nurses and physicians and pharmacists are categorical data. So we have two different types of data, categorical and numerical, and more than two groups. If the data is normally distributed data, we do what we call it, or we apply what we call it ANOVA, analysis of variances. Yes, Waad, please.
Yes, for anyone in the participants who doesn't want to wait for the question to be ended, I provided a Google form for the certification of attendees. You can now click to the form and give us some feedbacks on today's workshop. And please fill your full name in English and your personal email, not any institutional email, to avoid any errors. Thank you, Doctor. You can complete.
Yes, yes, Hanan, Yeah, Hanan, you may talk, please.
Yes, thank you. Doctor, I have a question. For interval and ratio, what the meaning the true zero? True zero, it is meaning there is no zero, right? Like age. Age consider interval or ratio, age and weight and height.
Age.
Sometimes, yeah, I miss it. It is under ratio or under interval. What is zero? What the meaning of true zero?
What does 20 mean? If I got your
true zero, absolutely zero.
True zero, where?
Between the interval and ratio, the difference between
interval and ratio.
Yes, between the difference between them, it is true zero.
Well, let me just differentiate between the interval and the ratio.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, there are different types of numerical data. If I got your question correct, there are different types of data. We have what we call it a nominal, we have ordinal, we have interval, and we have a ratio. Ratio, it has to be, I mean, in an array, like a scale. Okay, that's a ratio. And interval, it has different intervals. If I got your question correct, but there is no, I don't know if, what do you mean by true zero? Yeah.
Because sometime when I read, one of them they use always Fahrenheit and Kelvin temperature. So they so they say, I'm not remember the example exactly, but it is they use it always the Fahrenheit and Kelvin temperature measurement for different between the interval and ratio, the types of the data.
I really didn't get it. If you have
okay.
it, send it to me. I'll read it through it and I'll provide you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay.
Abrar, you may talk, please. Abrar. طيب Rinad.
Thank you for the great presentation, Dr. Abbas. I have a question regarding the calculation of sample size. Let's say an example. If I am conducting a study and the sample is the general population, but my targeted the targeted data is expected to be among the young, let's say up to 40, since this disease is mainly up to 40s. Regarding sample size calculation, I used the z-score for calculation, assuming that the data that I will get have normal distribution. Did I did right or no? Thank you.
Well, there is, as I have mentioned it earlier, there is no a single method of sample size calculation. In a quantitative study, the sample size has to be large in order to be representative. In a qualitative study, the samples, we have to collect data until we reach what we call it a data saturation, where there is a redundancy of information, or there is no new knowledge being added. Sample size, there are 3 parameters that influence the samples or impact on the sample size: p-value, effect size, and alpha level. Well, effect size, p-value can be 1% and it can be 5%. 5% will increase, decrease the sample size, and 1% will increase the sample size. Okay, and instead, for example, recruiting 100 using 5% p-value, you will have to recruit maybe 500 using 1% p-value. The same with the effect size and the same with the alpha level. Okay, so if we as biostatistician, they can play around those 3 parameters, and they can increase and decrease the sample size. So samples, and there are different formulas that they use, or we use in order to calculate the sample size, and we only use them for justification. Sample size has to be large, first of all. How large is the large? No one can tell, but it has to be large enough in order to be representative. Now, as I mentioned earlier, do not go less than 30. Recruit 1,000, 1 million, it's okay, it's very nice. It will be strong study, a very strong study, and the conclusion will be wonderful, and the novelty will be wonderful if you have a larger sample size. Well, in terms of the population, we always say that the sample size has to be at least 10% of the total population. Then you have to identify your total population and then try to get at least 10% of those total population. Say, for example, the total population is 1,000, so you have to recruit at least 100 out of those 1,000, and so on. So there are different justifications, and there is no single way or method of calculating sample size. Okay, yes, under the name of Dr. Abbas, you can talk, please. Hello. Or Abrar, you can talk, please, if you would like to. Hello. طيب في هنا there is a question, Dima. If I have 2 professional groups, doctors and nurses, and they answer the question differently, what test to use to determine if this difference is statistically significant or not? And how can I choose the test? All right, so we have 2 different groups, and the test, what was the test, first of all, Dima? Was it, I don't know, what was the question you asked them? Yani, groups, doctors and nurses are categorical. One category is doctor and the other category is nurses. So this is one categorical data. Now, what was the question? Yani, did you ask them, for example, do you smoke or no? Another categorical question. So you apply what we call it a chi-square test to study the association between the 2 groups. Now, if you ask them, for example, if you took their pulse, for example, you said, or you asked them about their weight, let's say, weight. How much do they weigh? So we have doctor and we have nurses. And we would like to study the relationship between the doctors and nurses in terms of weight. Then we have first of all to study the normative distribution of the data. If it is normally distributed data, we do what we call it, or we apply a t-test. If it's non-normal distributed data, we apply a man-with-new test. Okay, yes, Abrar, do you have a question or that's it? Abrar, you can talk.
Sorry, that's it for me. I forgot the hand.
All right.
We have one question in the chat box from Hanan.
Okay, Hanan. Are qualitative data compatible with? No. No, qualitative data has to be analyzed in a different way. Well, the statistics is applied only to quantitative data. That's it. or qualitative. What do you mean, first of all, by qualitative? Yeah, قادة. قادة صح. What do you mean by qualitative? And I answered the right question. Because there are two different types of approach. We have what we call it qualitative studies and a quantitative study approach, okay, or design. And a qualitative, like using interviews, open-ended surveys, or open-ended questions, observation, what we call it, like a phenomenological studies to study the lived experience, or we have what we call it a ethnographic study. So those, you analyze them in a different way. There is another methods of applying analysis, like thematic analysis and content analysis and so on. In a quantitative study, we apply statistics, okay? If I have, Raqad says, if I have a scale in different language and I translated it into Arabic or to Arabic by an approved translation center, do I have to validate it, or a pilot study is sufficient? You have to validate it, yes. And a pilot is part of, or one step of the validation. There is no one method, single methods of data analysis, I mean, of translation of a data collection, or research documents. However, the process I explained, which is back translation procedure, and then after that, you have to study its reliability and validity, apply a pilot test, and then study, try to get the reliability or test the reliability through the Chrome batch alpha. Other than predictors, what are the applications of Cox regression analysis for which the researcher might need to collect time to event, usually, yeah. Time to event, survival analysis, not a regression or Cox regression analysis. Can I ask the doctor for help in calculating sample size and a control trial? Yep, sure. But first of all, I have to know what was the total population, and based on it, we can calculate the sample size. There is a book for Monroe. I think the latest edition was 2015, 2016. And based on the 3 parameters, for example, it identifies the 3 parameters, the p-value, the effect size, and the alpha level. So you have to choose between the 3 parameters, and based on the total population, you can detect your sample size, if you have it. Yes, Cox regression, also called survival analysis or time to event. Sorry, that's correct. All right, so if I have a missing data, should I code it? For example, I'll just read through them. Abdulaziz Al-Mutairi, if I have a missing data, should I code it? For example, 99 equals missing data. Well, you mean in the data entry. And another question, if I'm going to enter a lab's test value of let's say 30 ml per minute, can it be analyzed normally? I mean, without being coded. I didn't get the second point or the second question. However, for the missing data, you can enter them as 99, or you can leave them blank. Okay, you can leave it blank, or you can enter it as 99.
Doctor, regarding the second question.
If I'm going to enter lab test value or EGFR value, let's say 30 ml per minute, can it be analyzed normally? I mean, without being coded? Yes, you can. Yeah. But you have to enter only 30 without ml per minute. Only 30. It can be, yes, without coding. You don't have to code it, actually. You have to enter it as it is. Now, can I contact you by email, Doctor? Yeah, sure. Wad will provide you my email. That's okay. Now, in correlation analysis between two variables, if the R square very low, if the R square is very low, but P value is significant, can I say there is a correlation? That's very important question. Okay, Hannah, well, and asks question about the regression. In regression, we usually look at the R and the B value. In parametric and non-parametric methods, we study the B value. I mean, we consider the B value. B value sometimes is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So that's why we have to go and do, regression is getting popular these days because it looks at the R value, R square and the B value. But the R square has to be strong enough, not very low, even if the B value is, highly significant. Okay, so we have to consider both actually. And if we will consider B value only if it is significant and the R square is not, then regression will be like parametric and non-parametric. Okay, to anyone who wants us to provide, okay, خلاص. If we have, and I'm enjoying the questions actually.
We have more questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, Q&A. If I don't have enough experience with the statistics, does seeking help from statistics affect the quality of the research? No. It's highly, there are two issues that we have to consider in research. I always say research is a teamwork. You can't do everything by yourself. So it's legally and it's unethical to seek help from a statistician. This is one, because you don't have, for example, enough background to do analysis by yourself. So it's okay to seek help from a biostatistician. This is one. Two, you may need to also do an editing, English editing to your manuscript. That's also ethical. You can do it. When you develop your manuscript or your thesis, you send it to an English editing services and they edit for you. Yeah. Hannah, you can talk, Hannah. You may talk if you have a question. All right, so
السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله.
أهلا دكتور، شكرا جزيلا للمعلومات القيمة صراحة. يعني الستاتستكس من أصعب المواد اللي تواجهنا. جزاك الله خير. You make it simple. سؤالي إنه لو عندي outliers also, يعني like 4 or something, like outliers, whether it is very low values compared to others or very high. Is it like ethical or acceptable to remove these outliers to get more like significant correlation or whatever?
Yes, certainly you can do this. And this is what we said it. Earlier, and I mentioned this, we have to perform a descriptive statistics in order to identify the outliers. So, if you have, لأنه ممكن they change the whole results. Okay.
Yes.
For example, the mean or the standard and the median can be changed due to the outliers. يعني مثلا كل الأجوبة في مجموعة، بينما هذا مختلف تماما. أنا ممكن أعطيكم example الآن مثلا يا دكتورة، أعطيكي مثلا خلينا نقول systolic blood pressure. systolic blood pressure عندي مثلا 120 120 و130 و160. 160 أنا if I will calculate the mean it will be 120 240 و130 370 و160. Okay, divided by 4 for example. The mean might be normal. يعني ال overall results will be normal.
Yes.
بينما أنا لو if I will trim ال 160 the results will be totally different. So we have to consider this, or another way is to apply a non-parametric methods due to the outliers. لأنه هنا المين معناته إيش المين؟ Mean is normally distributed. I mean the mean stands in the middle of the data, and the data is normally distributed to the right and to the left. Exactly in the middle of the data. The median distributes the data 25-75. Mean distributes the data 50-50%. That's the other way. We either trim the outlier and do the analysis, or we do a non-parametric. First of all, I prefer to do the non-parametric methods, or to follow the non-parametric methods. If it did not change, then trim the outlier and do the analysis. again.
Okay, great. طيب دكتور، بالنسبة للسؤال الأول عن ال P value وال R square. If I have like huge, not huge, I mean like 300, above 300, around 800, around 400 cases or data collected, and the correlation between, for example, the age and something, one of the variables, it gives the R square 0.05, but the p-value is like 0.002, which is very significant. So I can't depend on the p-value, as you said.
And the regression depends on both R square and p-value. p-value itself only يعني أنت تتكلم عن 0.025 يعني أنت ما توصل يعني 1%.
Exact.
إيه ما توصل حتى 1%. no, I don't recommend this. يعني بيكون الريجريشن نفسه نفس البارامتر، يكون البارامترك. ف it will depend on p-value. p-value alone in regression is not يعني
it's not enough.
Not enough, yes. It's not enough.
So what is the cut-off point to say that the R square is significant?
Then you have to reach to the right model. فهمتي علي دكتورة؟ إنه
لا.
fitting model. اللي أقصده إنه في الريجريشن you have to change in the variables until you reach to a higher R square. That's why it takes very long time in doing regression.
What do you mean by changing the value?
يعني أنا ال variables for example أنت إيش هذا؟ هل هذه logistic regression ولا إيش؟
I don't know what. هي العلاقة بين some scale or score احنا سوينا score to estimate the satisfaction of patients with the emergency care in the hospital with the time that they spend in the emergency. So I don't know what do you call this?
So time and
level of satisfaction.
Did you check the correlation first of all?
Yeah, we did correlation analysis. So
you did
regression. regression analysis.
First of all, you have to check the correlation. This is a linear relationship, by the way, because both of them are numerical data. So this is a linear relationship. So you have to study the relation. I mean, the correlation first of all. If there is a relation between the two numerical variables, then after that, if you'd like to detect the prediction or how strong is it, then you go to a regression. I'll give another example, Dr. الآن if I have, for example, age, okay, age and systolic blood pressure. Age is a numerical data, and systolic blood pressure is a numerical data. To study the relationship between the two numerical data, we do a correlation coefficient. A correlation will detect if there is a relationship through the p-value. How strong is the relationship? If it is a strong or weak or medium relationship. And the third is the nature of the relationship. يعني is it upward positive relationship or downward negative relationship. يعني كل ما يكثر مثلا العمر، كل ما كبر الإنسان السيستوليك بلاد بريشر حقه يزيد، أو لا العكس، كل ما قل العمر السيستوليك بلاد بريشر يزيد upward or downward. الآن أنا I studied the correlation between these two variables. وطلعت فعلا there is a strong, statistically strong, positive relationship between age and systolic blood pressure. الآن أنا طيب عمري أنا مثلا 40، لما يكون عمري مثلا 60 كم بيكون؟ how much will be my systolic blood pressure؟ هذه أسوي الريجريشن. Okay, and this is linear regression by the way، لأن both of them are numerical data. فأنت الداتا اللي عندك هذه linear، يعني there is a linear relationship between those two. You do what we call it a linear regression. ما أدري أنت وش طبقتي، يمكن عشان كذا طلعت معك النتيجة بهذا الشكل، لكن ممكن أنت ما سويتي يعني linear relationship، ممكن رحتي عملتي logistic relationship or ordinal relationship فطلعت النتيجة بهذا الشكل. ممكن.
Okay. So your suggestion is to do linear regression?
Linear relationship بحسب فهمي، أنا ما شفت الداتا لكن بحسب فهمي لها إنها يعني
أيوة. هي سكور للsatisfaction، معطينه سكور وبعدين حسبنا السكور وشفنا العلاقة بينه وبين the time that the patient they spend in the emergency department. فلقينا negative، يعني إنه كل ما يزيد time of waiting time كل ما يقل satisfaction.
تمام، جميل. أوكي. فالآن إيش تبين؟ يعني ليش الريجريشن هنا طيب إذا في؟
ما أعرف، أنه هو صراحة الطالبات اللي سووه لأنهم هم أخذوا كورس في SBSS فأعطوني الريزلتس، بس أنا
أعتقد إنك فقط الكورليشن هنا كافي. correlation correlation coefficient فقط كافي، مو محتاجة حتى regression. إذا فقط هذه النتيجة اللي تبين توصلين لها فقط.
أوكي، جزاك الله خير، شكرا.
Can we find the session recording? Yes, it's recorded and I'll provide it. I'll give it to وعد إن شاء الله طيب إذا في سؤال أخير.
Yes، أنا عندي comment لو سمحت دكتور. أنا أبرار.
تفضل.
ليش ما ناخذ مع ال p-value confidence interval كإنديكيتور للsignificance؟
في البارامتريك والنان بارامتريك؟
لا، زي مثلا في حالة حنان ليش ما أخذنا مع ال p-value confidence interval عشان نشوف how significant it is, because she said that she took the coefficient the R square.
She did لا هي well the confidence interval is not, I mean we don't report the confidence interval first of all في ال correlation. correlation B value R value
بس في الريجريشن صح؟
positive and negative. الconfidence interval في البارامتريك والنون بارامتريك حتى في الريجريشن ما هي موجوده. في البارامتريك and non parametric methods يعني T test, ANOVA, Mann-Whitney, Cross-Wallis test. This is where we report the confidence interval. The correlation coefficient, no, we don't report it. لكن the B value is يعني the standard in parametric or non-parametric. في الريجريشن اللي كنت أتكلم عليه، الريجريشن اللي هو الR square والB value, both of them. We report the confidence interval, yes, بس we report it في parametric و non-parametric methods.
لا، لأنه لما أنا أخذت 3 courses الانترو باي statistics والintermediate 1 intermediate 2، فكانت البروفيسور تقول لنا إنه معظم الباي statistician الحين مركزين على الكونفيدنس انترفال كانديكيتور للsignificance more than the p value، لأن ال p value أحياناً ما تعطي
indication. صحيح.
ما تعطي indication accurate.
صحيح totally agree. ولذلك الآن في اللي أكثر من ال B value ال confidence interval الريجريشن، يعني عشان كذا الآن في توجه بشكل كبير جدا على الريجريشن لأنه it does not يعني depend on B value alone.
يعني مثلا
is meaningless. يعني طيب طلعت significance, what does it mean؟ يعني it doesn't mean anything. بس الريجريشن لا، الريجريشن هنا في another indicator which is the R square. The higher it is, the stronger is the outcome.
طيب الحين يعني في مثلا موضوع حنان اللي تكلمت فيه اللي هي correlation between two groups صح؟
two numerical، لأن هي عندها
two numerical، فراح نستخدم linear regression. طيب
لحظة هي بحسب أولاً قبل كل حاجة إحنا لازم نعرف first of all the aim of the study. What was the aim of the study؟ هل أنا
مثلا association
على أساس
زي ما قالت
study I apply the right statistical method. لو كان يعني أنا if I would like to study the prediction of unsatisfaction مثلا، أيوة هنا ونسوي we have to apply regression. لكن هي فقط she wanted to know whether مثلا satisfaction related to time spent يعني in the waiting area or no. بحسب فهمي أنا ما شفت الداتا، بحسب فهمي لا no correlation is enough. correlation it detects the relationship between two numerical variables. فعندي هنا السكور is a numerical variable والtime is a numerical variable. فهنا correlation it will detect whether, for example, spending too much time in the waiting area was يعني correlated with the satisfaction or was not.
يعني R square enough يعتبر.
لا مو R square، R value.
R value sorry.
R value B value whether it's positive or negative.
حلو، يعني confidence interval
هنا
مرتبطة بالريجريشن.
الكورليشن ما يطلع ما تطلع confidence interval. الكورليشن
يا صح بس R صح. شكرا جزيلا على كل اللي قدمته لنا، وصراحة presentation مرة informative، وأنا ودي صراحة إنه أتواصل معك إذا ما كان عندك مشكلة عشان أسألك على بعض الأسئلة في الكلينيك داتا، لأنه عندي أسئلة فما أعرف إذا كان عندك وقت.
ما في مشكلة، بس تواصلي مع وعد وخليها تتواصل معنا، ما عندي مشكلة.
أوكي شكرا جزيلا.
Do we have questions or that's it? All right, shall we stop?
Yeah, so far we covered all the questions. They're asking if you can provide the slides, Doctor.
Yeah, sure. You have it. Give it to them. It's okay.
اوكي. لأي أحد طلب إيميل الدكتور عباس تقدرون تتواصلون على إيميل الفريق sciecho.team@gmail.com. We will provide you with all of the information that you have and all the questions. We will be happy to serve you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And I wish, you know, I can answer all of the questions, but I don't think I'll be able to. Anyhow, I developed the questionnaire. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Inshallah, I meet with you in another seminar in 1 or 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Thank you, Waad, and thanks for these for the team. Thanks for having me. Inshallah, we'll keep in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.